and then what happened next? Because you mentioned that at the conservatory was taught to play in a very specific way. So after graduating, did you meet someone who opened an entirely new perspective of piano playing for you?
Yes, of course. First, I would say when I entered the conservatory, because I had been playing for 7 years already, and because I had a good disposition for the piano and for music, I was able to advance rapidly. So instead of the 10 years that I should do in the conservatory, I only did 7 years. And this was basically medium and high level at the same time. So I finished at 18 with my degree. And at the time, in Italy, there was no DMA or superior degree. It was finished. So the state school was finished. I couldn't do anything else in the state school. So, and there were no private schools either. What I could do is find a teacher to continue study on my own. And so I remember the first thing that happened after I turned 18, I was offered by the director of conservatory it was a temporary job teaching theory. So I started, because I don't come from a wealthy family, so I needed to work. I started teaching when I was 15 because I realized that my classmates, my friends, and I mean, I do realize that this may sound like bragging. I don't mean to, but it's true. Even teachers in my hometown conservatory, even teachers sometimes came to me for solutions on fingerings and things, and how do you play this? And teachers, which was very strange to me. But my classmates and also classmates in other studios often came to me, and I basically gave them lessons. I remember my first formal student. I was 16 years old, and she had failed 2 times to pass an important exam for piano, which is the next to last exam. But without that, she couldn't access the last exam for graduation. And it's a very difficult exam, which spans, at the time, it spanned 3 days. You were required to prepare so much repertoire and then have it all ready. And so you needed the standard repertoire, like 1 classical sonata by Beethoven, 1 romantic piece, 1 modern piece, but you also needed 24 preludes and fugues by Bach, and you would only play 1 by extracting a number. And you needed 23 etudes from Clementi's Gradus ad Parnassum, and you would only play 1 by extracting a number. You needed 3 Scarlatti sonatas. Then they locked you up in a room for 3 hours and gave you a piece to learn. Then you had to come out and play it. And then there was sight reading. There were other things. This is the most difficult exam. They divided in 3 days. And this friend couldn't pass it. She basically even lost the privilege of being a student in the conservatory. She could try again, but only as a private student coming to the conservatory, but she couldn't access the conservatory as a student anymore. So her father was desperate, and because we were classmates and they thought, I was doing very well, so they asked me to help her, and I gave her lessons once a week. And so then when she attempted the exam again, she passed it this time. And then I kept working with her for 2 more years until she passed also the graduation exam. So we passed it together, basically, because at 16, I was helping her. She passed the exam, and then 17, 18, I did my graduation, and she did too. But so this is just an example to say I started teaching very, very early, out of need, but also out of discovering that I loved it and discovering that I could help, that I somehow was effective in helping. And then, of course, I continued all these years. So even there, you learn how to do it better and better. But when I finished conservatory, I was teaching theory, as I said, and did not have a teacher. I was practicing on my own, and I went to a competition. This competition was in northern Italy, in Pavia is the place, beautiful city. And the competition was in 2 rounds. I passed the first round and I go to the finals, and I play. I don't win any prizes, but I consider it a positive experience because I got to play my entire repertoire. It was a lot of repertoire. The last round was a 1-hour recital. And but most importantly, after the competition was over, one of the jury members, who was a legendary pedagogue in Italy from Naples, her name was Anna Maria Pennella. I knew her name, but I didn't know much else about her, except her reputation was very good. But she came to me and she said, my colleagues on the jury thought that you should not get to the finals. They wanted to eliminate you. I asked them to give you a chance to play in the finals because I wanted to hear more of your playing. And I think that you have a lot of talent, but there is a lot of things that you can do differently or that I can show you that may help you. I was a little skeptical because, as you know, or at least I shouldn't say that, but as I assume there is in our world a lot of people who just try to go around fishing for students, and sometimes it's ethically questionable at best. But I was curious, and the reputation of Anna Maria Pennella was so high that I told myself, this has to be something else. This has to be genuine interest. And so I was living in my hometown at the time, so I could take a bus, and in 2 hours I would be in Naples. It's very close. So I decided to go. And so a few weeks later, I went to her house. I remember very well. This was April of 1994. And I went to her house, and that day, I can say that it was like a new world was opening up for me, because she was a great teacher, and she knew basically what she gave me was a way to look at a piano score and forget about the piano. It was the first serious hint that the piano is just a medium, and it is really like being conductors and being in front of an orchestra and imagining layers of sound coming from different orchestra sections. And she could explain in detail what her view was of every moment of every piece. And then, because she was also a composer and had a degree in composition, she was also able to, she had a knack for finding the pivotal moments, the pivotal parts of a piece that could make it or break it. And she taught me how to find them and how to be flexible and elastic while at the same time keep the structure of a piece very strong, so that it wouldn't be endangered by that freedom and that flexibility, which we do need. And then I would say she understood the psychology of, my psychology, but of students in general, who tend to realize things in our own heads and don't really know whether we are actually projecting them onto an audience or not. So often, even nowadays, I find with my own students or students I work with, they think they're doing something, but they're not really doing it. They're only thinking about it. And so I find that if you don't exaggerate and even go beyond what is required, then you can reduce it. But if you don't pass that line, you never even get close to it. And then things stay in your head and don't get shared with the audience. This could be about colors, about dynamics, about breathing, about changes of mood, about projection of melody. And that's another thing. She really insisted on having melodic material always continuing the thread, never losing that thread, even with all the shifts and the changes of color and the dynamic changes that one needs to do. But the melody needs to be always present and always not difficult to find for the listener. And I find, strangely enough, that this is something that a lot of pianists don't do, or students, most of students don't do. But even in our profession, a lot of professional pianists don't do. And then from there, what to do with the rest of the material. And that is perhaps the most precious part. Because I thought polyphonic music is mostly Baroque music, in the sense of reading it vertical and separating the voices. But I learned that every piece is like that. Every piece should be read horizontally, and every voice is a finite, fully fleshed, important part that is like a melody. It's just that you have to establish which melody has the priority. And then you have to develop the ability to separate these layers. And there could be 3, 4, 5. And so this, it's important to develop the independence of fingers and the ability to do different things. And so these were principles and ideas, but I do think that then I developed them on my own. And this is also important, to continue digging. And sometimes this digging can take you in a different direction than your teacher even expected. But the beautiful thing with Anna Maria Pennella was, when I went to lessons, I could talk to her, and she was very open-minded. And she would say, okay, I wouldn't do it this way, but I like it. Or she would say, I would change. Maybe don't do it the way I suggest, but find another way than the way you're doing now, because maybe this doesn't work as well. And it was very stimulating. It was very interesting. And then I also had a year and a half, almost 2 years of lessons with Ciccolini. Aldo Ciccolini, already in terms of being famous as a classical pianist, he was certainly one of the most famous ones in Europe and worldwide, although his name is probably not known by a lot of young people today. But he has a very high number of incredible recordings. He played with all the most important conductors of his youth and also his life. He played with Furtwängler, he played with Karajan, and with many, many, many great conductors. But, he was an incredible pianist, and he liked to teach, although he liked to teach when he found the student interesting. Otherwise, he could be quite brutal to the student. But fortunately, he liked me. And so he gave me a lot of insider information, let's say, because he played everything. He had a huge, huge repertoire. And his teaching was, how can I say, it was not so broad-minded, but very specific. Because I was already at quite an advanced level. But he gave me so many practical advice, and also further opened my mind to fingering possibilities that no one ever thinks about. And then, as usual with me, I took this further. And I know that my fingering is quite unusual, because I started thinking completely outside the box when it comes to fingering, even scales, arpeggios, and things like that. I know all the traditional fingerings that I had learned, but I also can use any type of fingering different, even playing fast scales, chromatic or diatonic, using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. Or the opposite, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, without anybody being able to hear the gaps. And this increases the level of speed and legato by many times that one can achieve. It raises the ceiling, things like that. But also the sophistication of pedaling and the combination between pedaling and finger legato, which again, I brought to my own conclusions, and I developed an entire technique. I constantly do finger pedaling. And I think it's an important tool for anyone to at least think about. And so things like that. And then with Ciccolini, I could, because he practiced and played through a lot of repertoire when he visited, I could simply sit down and listen to him. He would allow me to do that for hours, very close, and watch him play, listen to him, and learn a lot just by that. A lot, maybe most than anything else.
Wow. So as you mentioned before, later you started with Anna Maria Pennella and then Aldo Ciccolini. And how would you describe the difference in their philosophy and approaches? Because I imagined their personalities and philosophies were quite different. So what stayed with you the most from each of them?
They did have some things in common, because, they were both born in Naples. They were only 2 years apart. They were schoolmates, and they studied with different people and had different trajectories, but they had a lot in common. The differences in their philosophy of teaching were, as I already mentioned, that Anna Maria Pennella was talking more broadly about concepts of performing on the stage and projecting and finding the pivotal moments in the work and combining flexibility and freedom, sort of almost in an improvisatory way, but with the strictest logic and preserving the integrity of the work. With Ciccolini, as I said, it was mostly the quality of sound, the sound production, pedaling and legato. Ciccolini played the piano, which is what I do nowadays too. Ciccolini played the piano the same way an organ player plays the organ, using finger substitution almost at all moments, and I do that too. And as I said, to me, the greatest thing a teacher can do is give you principles that then you can extract and apply in your own way and continue. So it wasn't like an instruction that went bar by bar, note by note, piece by piece. It was mostly these broad concepts that complemented what I was discovering on my own, and combined altogether gave me the way that I play nowadays. And I try to do the same thing with my students. I know that what I tell them sometimes shocks them because it goes outside of the beaten path or the normal way. But to me, it's just like I'm trying to crack open a door so that they maybe can get through and explore on their own. And if they get strayed too far off, and if they are my students and they stray too far off, I can always try to tell them, maybe try to go left instead of right here. But it is important that practice be a moment of discovery, a discovery of self and discovery of ways of expressing what the composer meant. And so this is basically, I would say, what the two teachers had in common, that in different ways, they allowed me to do that.
That's wonderful.
All the same year. That was not planned. It just happened that way, and it was totally crazy. I basically shut myself in my studio at Oberlin, and I would practice all night long because during the day I was teaching all day, and then I would travel and come back. It was a good thing I was young. But yeah, so that's everything that happened all at once.